Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be making a vase, and I'm going to be throwing with 3 pounds of clay. We're going to be getting a vase that's at least 12 inches in height, maybe a little taller. We're going to have a nice round form, and afterwards I'm going to slice it in half. You guys can see how thin it is. You know, being able to throw things light. Sometimes you're just showing off. Sometimes it's, beneficial to the form. But we're basically going to be covering that in this particular demo. So to start, like everything else, I need to center. And when I'm throwing taller things, like a vase, I'll center it to a point where the bottom is narrower, as opposed to something like a plate or a bowl. I would center it and have it be a much wider, lower shape before I open it up. So often I see one of the things that people really struggle with vases is trying to get all the clay up from the very bottom. And well, right now, while I'm centering it, is the easiest time to do that. So you see me pressing this bottom in with, my right hand. You can't do this too aggressively, otherwise you'll start to actually push your clay off the bat, and you'll find this weird air bubble underneath it where it looks like the clay detached from your bat. So if you do get that, then you just, you're doing the right thing, but you're doing it too aggressively. You got to be gentle with your clay, especially when you're working with porcelain. Porcelain's like a princess. But anyway, so now I'm going to open it, and you're going to be able to see that once I'm done opening it, it's almost like I've already done a pull, because it's going to be wider than it is, or excuse me, it's going to be taller than it is wide. Again, as always, you spent all this time centering it, so make sure that when you open it, you just take your time, stay steady, lean your forearms on the splash guard, and make sure you open it without knocking it off. And so now I opened with these 2 fingers, kind of diving down at a slight angle, with my thumb here at the bottom to kind of gauge how far I can go, because the thumb's touching the bat. And now, after having reached all the way down, I'm just going to pinch a little bit and pull up. So I get to basically dovetail those 2 motions right into each other. And I'm digging in with my thumb. A lot of times when you're pulling up, you're using your middle finger and index finger to do most of the pulling. But in this case, I'm pulling mostly with my thumb. And you can kind of see, how that's happening. Like I've squeezed all this up and I haven't gotten up here yet. But it's my thumb that's actually doing most of the work here. And the reason for that is, so often when people are trying to get height, they're pulling and pulling and pulling, but if they're pushing out more than they're pushing in, the form gets wider. And if your form gets wider, it's much harder to get height. If you can keep it a really tight, narrow cylinder, you're going to have a much easier time. And like I said before, the hardest part is usually getting this clay at the bottom. And so when I start my pull, I'm actually going to hang out at the bottom here. And I'm really going to dig in. And I'm pressing a little bit with my inside hand, but I'm mostly pressing more with my right hand, which is on the outside. I can keep this cylinder nice and narrow. And you can see that I hung out at the bottom for a while before starting to move up. That's because I want to make sure that that clay at the bottom is moving up. A lot of times people will start at the bottom, start squeezing, and start pulling up. But by the time they're full squeeze, they're already, an inch up the pot. And then they're trying to, they've got this mostly filled out form with all this clay at the bottom, and they're saying, Andy, like, you can throw these huge pots with 3 pounds of clay. How come I can't? It's because you leave all your clay at the bottom. So again, I'm going to hang out at the bottom here. And I still ease into my pressure and ease out of it. That's what helps keep the clay on center. Now I'll start moving up. And if your hands, feel like they're full of clay and you need to get that off, just you can take your hands off mid-pull. You do want to make sure that your hands don't get too much clay on them because all that clay is a lot of drag. And then the bottom's going to be trying to spin forward while your hands are holding the top back. And that's going to cause it to start to torque and twist in the middle. Another thing about that is when I was at the very bottom, I was pulling up, I was using basically all three of my fingers. I was trying to use my hand like a shovel and scoop the clay up. And so I needed, the power of all three of these fingers. But as I get closer to the top, I want to use less power because I need to be more delicate up here. And so, I'll start with three fingers and then I'll start to pull one back. And then as I get higher and higher, I'll only be using one finger. It's a little hard to see when I'm doing it, but that is indeed what's happening. Like here, when I pick back up, it's really only one finger. The other thing too is you want to make sure that you're not pulling too much from the top. You want your form to be even. Even is the name of the game. Sometimes you can leave the rim as a hair thicker than everything else. But when you're just making the cylinder, you really want to just, have it be just straight up and down, nice and even. Right now I'm getting the water out of the bottom. If you don't get all the water out, have an S-crack. No fun. And when you're doing this, it's important that you, have a good sense of where the middle of the wheel is so that when you're, taking your hand in and out of here, you're not, bending it over and making your form wider. All right, so I'm going to do probably one more pull and then I'll start shaping it. And you'll notice with this pull that I'm going to add water to the inside, but not the outside. I make sure my forearm has a little bit of moisture because it's going to be pushing against that rim. Got all three fingers engaged. Now I'm down to like 2 fingers. The clay is getting pretty thin, so right now I'm down to like 2 fingers. Excuse me, 1 finger. Pause here. Clean my hands off. I don't have that much clay on my hand, but it's also nice just to give your hands a little bit of a rest, get the moisture out of the bottom. And the reason that I added water to the bottom but not the inside is because, with this pull I'm getting a little bit more width, just a hair. And it's mostly my inside hand that's doing the scooping. And by avoiding water on the outside, I get to keep my clay in a much more strong state. All right, so that's probably most of the height I'm going to get with just going for a cylinder. It is going to end up being a little bit taller. We're basically at 11 inches right now for any of you who are following. And the top is about a hair under 4.5 inches wide. 11 inches tall, 4.5 inches wide. I would say if I slice this in half, my walls would be almost perfectly even, maybe a hair thicker at the bottom, just because I need a little bit of extra clay to sort of, hold it up, but not by very much. Keep your hands clean, even though this is a pottery studio. All right. And again, I'm going to be able to add a little bit of water to the inside, but I'm not going to add any water to the outside. And now I'm going to be shaping it, but I'm going to be doing it with the same hand position I was when I was pulling it up. And this is going to make it so that when I shape it, I don't lose my height. And it's mostly just one hand on the or one finger on the inside and one finger on the outside doing the work. My inside hand has contact in a few more places, but they're just gently skimming the insides of the vessel, you know, trying not to disturb it too much. It's really just, and you can see, it's all this one finger basically doing the work. And I'm just gonna, you know, slowly coax the body to get wider. And basically, if I was throwing with a, you know, more clay and my form was heavier, my walls were thicker, I'd be able to do all of this a bit more aggressively, a bit more quickly. But again, you know, this is a shape that I'm kind of showing off a little with. I'm showing like, hey, I'm really skilled. I can throw thin. And the reason it's hard is because you got to be so gentle and delicate. You know, these walls are probably about 1/8 of an inch wide, maybe even a little less, or eighth of an inch thick. And so this piece is going to be going in a crystalline kiln. So I want to make sure that I have no throwing lines, or very few at least. Take my trusty metal rib, my favorite tool. Smooth everything out. Special shout out to the all the ladies out there. Female form is definitely the inspiration for so many beautiful shapes, and vases are definitely one of them. I ribbed the inside as well as the outside because in a long firing, this porcelain gets really soft. And if there's throwing lines on one side but not the other, the wall's almost like equalized, and you'll see some of the throwing lines on the outside despite having smoothed them out. They just kind of get balanced out from the inside. Okay, so we've got the inside metal ribbed, we've got the outside metal ribbed. The form from basically here down is essentially done, and now I don't really want to touch it. And it's, you know, pretty thin. I probably can't actually get it much wider, maybe a hair, but you know, that's going to be getting pretty excessive. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be working from here up, and I'm going to try to make it so that I don't let any water drip too far down. And if it does, I'm going to wipe it up right away. And this is one of the big tricks to throwing thin, is you kind of section things off. Because now I'm going to be able to work on this top, and while I'm working on it, the bottom is actually getting drier. And as it gets drier, it's going to be getting stronger. You know, again, with these thin forms, it's all about just gently coaxing the clay into what you want it to do with some really gentle pressure. And so I'm making contact in a few spots, but I've got, you know, enough water there so my hands aren't going to stick. And I'm just gently easing into the pressure and then gently easing out. And I am being like really gentle. a little tiny pull. A lot of times, one of the things that will throw people off at this stage is like right along here as they're, you know, collaring it in, it'll start to twist there and it'll get weak and it'll start to torque. And if that happens, it either means it's just plain too thin or you just weren't scraping the water off of that area frequently enough and it just got absorbed into the walls. And now the wall there, which is trying to, be this strong architectural element that's bridging the shoulder, the body, and the neck together, has been weakened because it's waterlogged. So it's softer and it's heavier. Bad combination. And you'll see I'll add like a little water, and I'll do it to the top and the bottom, but then I'll make sure it doesn't drip too far down the form. I'm not squeezing a lot here, because again, I need my shoulder to be strong. I'm just kind of going over it, making sure it's not torquing anywhere. And then this neck area, I'm just pulling it up because as I collar it in, it gets a little thicker. I want to keep everything even. Take the metal rib, go back and forth, and it's basically repeating the same couple things. Add a little water, do a few things, scrape off the slippy stuff, and then go back and add a little water so you can start coaxing that rim in more. And the reason you can't do it all at once, like I said, we just got these thin little walls. You can't do anything big and fast. You gotta be slow. When I was in college and I was learning how to throw vases, one thing that I would do is our studio had like an elective space. I was like a ceramics major, so I had my own little area, but there were general classes for elective students, and they had an area with like, I don't know, probably like 15 wheels or something like that, maybe even more than that. But I would go there like really late at night when no one else was around except for the other ceramic students because we basically lived in the studio. But I would go on each wheel and I would throw a cylinder as tall as I could get it. And I'd throw a cylinder on like every single wheel. I'd have like 15 cylinders as tall as I could get them. And then I would go back to the first one and I would, again, try to pull it up a little higher, but keep it as a cylinder. And I'd go all the way around every single one and do that. And then I'd go back to the first one and I'd start shaping it. And then I'd shape all of them. And basically what that did was it let me, it gave all of the forms a chance to dry out before I went on to the next step. And for those of you who are learning, you're not going to be able to pull it up. You're not going to be able to pull it up in as few pulls as I did, and so your clay is going to get a lot softer. If it gets soft, just give it a chance to dry out a bit. That is a great way to learn. Almost going off the camera. One other thing that throws a lot of people off when they're trying to do these forms is when you see the final form, it's got its trimmed foot, which is kind of narrow, and it's got this skinny little neck, and you look at it as this, pretty voluptuous because it's got this really nice curve. but also very, very delicate form because it's got this skinny little neck and this skinny little foot. And what a lot of people don't realize is when they're trying to make it, they're trying to get all that curve when they're throwing it. And you got to remember that, I started out with a straight up and down cylinder, and I didn't push it out that much. From the original cylinder I had, I only pushed the body out a little bit. But I'm bringing if I push the body out a little bit, I bring the neck in quite a bit, and then I trim the foot, I have this, skinny little foot. All of a sudden, the body looks a lot more curvaceous, even though from my initial, um, cylinder, I didn't actually push it out that much. A lot of people, they try to get their whole form too soon. Just got to wait a little longer. Wait until you collar that neck in, and wait until you trim it to see what you really got. And again, you'll see that there's, no torquing in my shoulder. Nice and steady because I've been taking care of it. And I generally try to make my vases so that they're pretty enough where you don't even need flowers. And to be fair, a lot of times if you want to put flowers in my vases, all you're going to get is like 1 or 2 roses. But for me, hey, that's all I think you need. Them to gently flare out. I'll press with my pinky opposite of my index finger just so that the pressure is a little more balanced. It's a little hard for you guys to see, but basically I'm pushing the rim out with this part of my finger, and then my pinky on the opposite side is pushing it out. That way the pressure that, brings it out is balanced. I'm actually a little off the top. Back the camera up a little bit so you can see it a little better. Nice S-curve vase. Beautiful girl. Unfortunately, though, she's going to get cut in half. So generally, I would always suggest, carving out a little gouge at the bottom before you wire it. And the other thing, too, is if you're working with porcelain and you are actually making these really, really thin, you want to be careful about how you dry them, because sometimes, even if you don't feel any wind in your room, there's always some sort of air current in your studio, and the really thin porcelain will be like really sensitive to it, and it'll lean. So you gotta like cover it with plastic and make sure the air isn't drying it out from one side more than the other. But yeah, so I wanted to show you how tall or how thin it was, because that's kind of the whole point. Right now, if you're following at home, we're at like 12¼ inches. Now let's slice it. Oh no, don't do it, it's so pretty. And if you're a student, this is something that I would advise doing just every once in a while. I mean, it kind of sucks to make a beautiful piece and then lose it like this, but you really do get a lot of good information. So, and because my clay isn't super soft, I was ripping it all the time, it's not collapsing already. So, hold that in place. this away. So you can see those are some pretty even walls. It's a little thicker at the bottom here. And I'm going to be trimming it with a nice round bottom, so you can see I've got a nice round inside to basically match. There's a little bit of extra thickness here, and it gradually gets thinner. And then there's a tiny bit of extra thickness at the rim, because that's the most likely area to, chip. And I've got very, very faint throwing lines on the inside, but not a whole lot. Whenever you're doing pieces this thin, you can't really have thick throwing lines because you just end up with a thick spot, even spot, thick spot, even spot, thick spot, even spot. So you really want to, do due diligence and rib the inside as well as the outside. And also, I've got a little bit of space here at the bottom so I can trim a nice tall foot so it doesn't look like my piece is, glued to the table. And yeah, I mean, the clay is much too soft to support itself from this stage, but that's basically the idea. Hope you guys liked it. Fortunately, now that